Alright, this is my second attempt at recording this. This is the start of what I'm hoping is going to be a short series where I build some kind of commander deck online, run it through a couple games, and then see what can be done to kind of improve on it and make everything work out a little bit better. This particular deck I spent about $5 on and then just used miscellaneous draft pieces that I had lying around. As you can see, the general is Yomiji, who bars the way. There's a reason that this guy doesn't get much love. He costs 7 for a 4/4, and whenever any legendary permanent dies, its owner gets it back to their hand. Uh, it's worth noting that you should not kill other generals with this in play. This does affect other players. I made that mistake. I'm a pretty terrible player sometimes. Uh, but we'll see what we can do with this guy and see how it turns out. I like to start with the mana base when I'm looking at a deck. There's 38 lands in this deck, which is a little bit low for my preferences, but there's a bunch of artifact mana and other ways to get more lands, so we'll see how that works out. We have the Urzatron, because why not? I've actually assembled it a few times with minimal tutoring. We have Temple of the False God, also because why not? We have some generic utility lands. Emeria and Mistveil Plains are the two most powerful of those. Mistveil Plains is there pretty much exclusively to help me find Emeria again if someone finds a way to deal with it. Emeria is probably one of the better cards in the deck. Vesuva also serves a lot of utility, especially with other legendary lands, since you can Legends rule your own lands and then get some number of them back with Yomiji. The legendary lands that I'm running are Untadake, which is a really, really bad Ancient Tomb, but it'll probably stay in for now. We also have Myron, which is really good. God's Eye gives you 1/1s when it dies, and Flagstones of Trocaire, which lets you get a Plains when it dies. This kind of brings me back to Ghost Quarter, these last two at least. More often than not, I'm Ghost Quartering my own lands in this deck just to see, or just to try to get some value out of them, and especially because I can get some of my lands back with Yomiji. So Ghost Quarter kind of serves a dual purpose of helping me get value out of my own legendary lands and also being hate for the broken non-basics that everyone's running. We've also got some pretty generic artifact acceleration. Honor-Worn Shaku is definitely the worst of these, but it has some flavor here, I guess, and we'll see how it works out. Sometimes it's much, much better than Worn Power Stone, and sometimes it is much, much worse than Worn Power Stone. We'll see how it plays in the couple games that we get to run it in, and if it needs to change, then it needs to change, but for now it's fine. One of the problems that mono white always has is how you get value out of your creatures and things. I've chosen to try to go with a life gain kind of plan. You have a bunch of 1-drops, your Soul's Attendant, Soul Warden, Martyr of Sands, Serra Ascendant, Ranger of Eos to tutor those up, and Proclamation of Rebirth to recur them in the late game. Because you've got so much life gain, Ajani's Pridemate becomes really, really good. He is the biggest beater in the deck, and more often than not is the way that you try to win the game, sadly enough. Marshall's Anthem for late game tricks and things like that. Weathered Wayfarer is definitely one of the better cards in the deck, honestly. You can tutor up Ghost Quarters repeatedly to get rid of utility lands. You can tutor up your Tron pieces, your Emeria, your Vesuva tricks, anything like that. That guy kind of does it all, and he's really powerful for his cost, especially because Ranger of Eos can tutor him up. Next, we've got some legendary creatures. Myojin of Cleansing Fire is probably the best of these. He has the best interaction with Yomiji. Your late game plan is frequently have Myojin and Yomiji in play, activate the Myojin's ability, and then in response sacrifice Myojin so that you get it back and can play it again post-Wrath. Darien is there to interact with the Soul Warden and Soul's Attendant. He does a pretty good job of making you hard to kill in the mid to late game. He's usually got a pretty big target. You've got some equipment to help deal with that a little bit, but he's probably one of the weaker slots. Commander Isha and Chomano, they both are there to interact with Pariah's Shield and Shield of Caldera to, make you a little bit harder to kill. Kemba is here mostly because there's a ton of equipment. The equipment's there on its own value, and then because there's a bunch of it and you're trying to tutor it up, Kemba becomes significantly better, especially when you've got these soul Soul Warden and Soul Attendant kind of effects. Lieutenant Kurdar and Mangara are both pretty good with Yomiji in play. Uh, Mangara is definitely better, but requires a sack outlet so that you can keep doing it. I've never actually gotten Mangara, the engine, up and running because the pieces are so slow and everyone kind of sees it coming and deals with it. But I'm sure it would be pretty good if I ever did manage to get it going. Maybe you can find a way to give Mangara haste or something. Day of Destiny seems obligatory. Legendary creatures getting bigger, getting in there. Maybe Yomiji can get in for general damage someday. Uh, Next, we've got some pretty generic utility, like your Face Fetters, your Aura of Silence, Disenchant, Swords to Plowshares. Worthy causes there to be another copy of Myron. It should probably be a High Market or Diamond Valley or something like that, but I don't think High Market is online yet, and Diamond Valley was too expensive for round one since I was building this mostly out of draft leftovers. Sculpting Steel does what Sculpting Steel does. It's either more ramp or something else that's powerful. Crystal Ball should probably be a Sensei's Divining Top or something like that, but again, I'm not really spending money on this right now. We'll see how it turns out and if I want to, spend a lot of money to make it better in the future, but at this point, I'm not feeling it. This next pile of cards is the Salvaging Station and other artifact recursion cards. This is actually, Salvaging Station is actually a really good way for monocolored decks or decks that aren't very good at drawing cards to get a lot of value. You've got like Martyr of Sands and Myron and Skull Clamp to kill creatures and untap it, and you can get back Expedition Map to tutor up good lands, Dispeller's Capsule to threaten artifacts and enchantments, Scrabbling Claws, Sunbeam Spellbomb isn't bad, you can just cycle it to draw cards or gain a bunch of life. Wayfarer's Bauble is kind of like Ramp at that point. So there's a lot of cool things that you can do with it, and I've kind of added all the effects that are kind of like that, except for Leonin Squire, which is pretty awful. He might make the cut if I had High Market and Diamond Valley and things like that to play with Nim Deathmantle with, but for now I think he's pretty far below the curve. The next pile of things we've got here is the equipment. Quest for the Holy Relic is definitely the worst here. It's pretty mediocre. It sits on the board. Sometimes it gets active. Most of the time it gets caught up in some kind of Chroma's Vengeance or Austere Command. Steel Shaper's Gift and Tajnar Swordsmith are both very good. Everyone knows that Stonehewer Giant is just insane, especially if it's out for multiple turns. The equipment themselves, Sylvok Lifestaff is there because you are trying to gain some life. The power boost is pretty relevant. The low equip cost is really good. And you have like Martyr of Sands, you have Skull Clamp, you have things dying all the time, and it's good to get a little bit of life off of them since you are trying to play the life gain game. Skull Clamp is always really good. The problem with this deck is that you're using it fairly most of the time. You don't have very many ways to make 1/1 tokens, but enough of your creatures are small and your board gets wrathed often enough that it's worth getting 2 extra cards here and there. White has few enough ways to draw cards that you kind of have to resort to things like Skull Clamp. Sword of Caldra is the only way to make your terrible Legends from Kamigawa block threatening. I have gotten in for general damage with Yomiji plus Sword of Caldra once. It's pretty terrible when you have to resort to that, but Sword of Caldra is definitely the way to do it if you're going to go about it that way. Shield of Caldra is there to protect like Yomiji when you pop your Myojin, or to make Darien harder to deal with, or make whoever you give a Pariah Shield harder to deal with. It serves a lot of utility and it helps you stall out the mid to late game while you're trying to find a way to do something relevant again. Nim Deathmantle is one of the best cards in this entire deck. It's really good with Martyr of Sands. It's pretty good with Myojin since you can blow everything up and then buy something back. It's especially good with things like Myron and High Market and Diamond Valley. I keep coming back to those because those 4 cards are usually the first things that I include in a new deck. Nim Deathmantle is like a recurring nightmare that you have to do a little bit more work for. It's a 2-card combo, and it costs a little more mana, but that card's banned, and it's banned for a reason. It's really powerful if you can get it going. This is a little bit easier to disrupt, but it also pumps your guy and gives them evasion, so I guess there's value there. if you haven't tried this card out, throw in a couple sack outlets, run it. There are enough people playing Wraths that it's good enough even if you don't have a ton of sack outlets, but if you do, the card is just ridiculous. This last pile of cards we've got here are ways to actually, try to win the game. Cards that are powerful in their own right rather than being some kind of slave to the theme here. White Sun Zenith is really good. I'm sure it's going to see a ton of play. It's probably one of the better cards for this format out of the new set. It gives white decks a lot of power. True Conviction, again, you can get in for general damage with Yomiji. It seems like a bomb. I haven't really played with it before. I've never drawn it. It seems like it could give you a way to close out games really quickly out of nowhere, which seems powerful because this deck typically has trouble actually killing people. Staying alive is the easy part. Sacred Mesa needs to get more credit. This card is absolutely ridiculous. You can just sink all your mana into it every turn and force people to deal with it or you'll kill them. I know Stormherd gets a lot more attention, but Sacred Mesa is probably almost as powerful as Stormherd most of the time. Not all at once, since Stormherd will usually get you 20 or more creatures in a single go, but Sacred Mesa is harder to disrupt. It doesn't go away if they wrath the board, and you can run it out early game, you can run it out late game, and it's a really powerful card that doesn't get a whole lot of attention anymore with things like Lumen Arc Ascension around. Amiri Angel is one of your few ways to make Skull Clamp better. It's really good in the mid game where you can run it out, play a couple lands, beat down a little bit, get some life off of your Soul Wardens and such. It's fine. It's probably not the best, but it's about the best I could do, and I had one lying around. This Sunblast Angel, one-sided Wraths are always good. They're better when you can buy them back with Nim Death Mantle sometimes. I had got this in the same draft that I got this Elspeth Tyrell in, and that was pretty good. This Elspeth took the place of Arcane Spyglass, which, for those of you not familiar, you can pay some costs and sacrifice a land to draw a card, and then every third card you draw, you get to draw an extra card. The plan was to sacrifice legendary lands and, get a little bit of value out of them, but that's actually terrible. It's pretty narrow. Elspeth will probably be better. I don't know if it's going to be at its best in the deck, but, it's a Planeswalker, it's on color, it does things that are relatively on theme, so it's got to be pretty good. So that's kind of where this deck is starting. It's probably going to turn into something completely different because, Yomiji is terrible, but we'll see what we can do with it, run it through a couple games and see how they go. It's about 50-50 on wins and losses right now, which is pretty good for a multiplayer format, but I think that's because no one takes us seriously, and probably for good reason. So I'll jump in a few games sometime soon, and we'll see how this goes. Thanks for watching.